In 2025, a team of researchers published a study in the journal Nutrients that made me stop and read it 3 times. They followed 168 nonagenarians, people in their 90s, from the Barbagia region of Sardinia. They tracked cholesterol levels, they tracked survival. And what they found was this: the people with the highest LDL cholesterol lived the longest. Not the lowest, the highest. The average survival for those with LDL above 130 was 3.82 years of follow-up. For those with lower LDL, it was 2.79. Two of the participants who became centenarians had LDL readings above 240, levels that would send most American cardiologists reaching for their prescription pads. These people eat 15 pounds of full-fat, aged sheep cheese per year. Every year, for their entire lives. Get a pen. Because what you're about to hear is not a story about one food. It's a story about what happens to food when it's made correctly, and why almost everything we've been told about saturated fat, cholesterol, and cheese misses the most important part. The Barbagia region of Sardinia has 3 times the centenarian rate of the rest of the island. The village of Sulo alone had 20 people reach 100 between 1996 and 2016. Sardinia as a whole has the highest proportion of male centenarians of any blue zone on the planet. And the researchers who first identified this region, Pes and Poulin, back in 1999, drew a blue circle around it on a map. That circle is where we're going today. Here's what I want to walk you through. First, the specific cheese these shepherds actually eat, and why it is fundamentally different from anything in your supermarket dairy case. Then, what 6 to 12 months of aging does to that cheese at the biochemical level, and why that transformation changes what your body does with it entirely. And finally, the part that most people miss completely, which is the way calcium, a mineral most of us are deficient in, and your gut lining all connect into a single protective system. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to buy, how to eat it, and what to look for on a label. Let's start with the false culprit. For decades, the logic went like this: cheese is high in saturated fat. Saturated fat raises LDL cholesterol. High LDL causes heart disease. Therefore, cheese causes heart disease. That chain of reasoning made intuitive sense. It was also, according to the data from Sardinia and several large meta-analyses, largely wrong, but not for the reason you might expect. The error isn't that saturated fat is healthy. The error is that this logic treats cheese as if it were a delivery vehicle for isolated saturated fat. It isn't. Cheese is a complex food matrix. Fat, protein, calcium, phosphorus, lactic acid bacteria, bioactive peptides, all organized together in a physical structure. And that structure changes what your body does with every single component in it. The Sardinians didn't stumble onto this by accident. They built it over centuries. There are 3 traditional cheeses from this region. The first is Pecorino Sardo, made from whole sheep's milk with selected starter cultures, aged in 2 forms: young for about 20 to 60 days, or maturo, aged 2 months or more. The second is Casu frisicu, also known as Casu marzu, which is pecorino taken further into fermentation by the deliberate introduction of cheesefly larvae. It's been eaten at Sardinian celebrations for centuries. The EU banned it on food safety grounds. I'm not going to tell you to eat it, but it matters that it exists because it tells you something about how far this tradition of active fermentation goes. The third cheese is the one that changes everything. It's called Fiore Sardo. Fiore Sardo is a PDO cheese, protected designation of origin, which means it must be made at the farmhouse level, from raw whole sheep's milk, from the Sarda breed specifically, using lamb rennet paste. No starter cultures are added, none. The fermentation is driven entirely by whatever wild bacteria live in that milk, in that farmhouse, in that environment. The cheese-making technique has remained essentially unchanged for centuries. What grows inside Fiore Sardo is a succession of wild microflora. In the first month, mesophilic lactobacilli dominate. The viable cell count rises from about 100,000 bacteria per gram on day 1 to 100 million by day 30. Then it slowly decreases as the cheese ages and the environment shifts. By the end of a full year of ripening, what remains is a complex, stable community of non-starter lactic acid bacteria, L. plantarum, L. pericaceae, and Enterococci. These are organisms that have done specific biochemical work to that cheese for 12 months. This is not the cheese in your refrigerator. This is something else entirely. Here's what you can actually do this week. I want to give you this now before the science, because the practical part matters most. When you go to the store, and you can do this at Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, any Italian specialty shop, or online from a half dozen importers, look for one of two things: Pecorino Romano or Pecorino Sardo, aged. The label should say aged, maturo, or stagionato. The longer the aging, the better. Minimum 3 months, 6 is better. The cheese should be hard, dry, and crumbly at the edges. The rind should be dark. If it bends or feels rubbery, it hasn't aged long enough, and the biological transformation I'm about to describe hasn't had time to complete. The other option, and this is the one I prefer for daily use, is Manchego, a Spanish sheep's milk cheese with a similar microbial profile and aging process. It's more widely available. It costs about $12 to $18 for a wedge that will last you 2 to 3 weeks. And it fits the same principle: raw or minimally processed sheep's milk, long aging, complex bacterial fermentation. At most Whole Foods and specialty grocery stores, you'll find Pecorino Romano in the specialty cheese section, not the refrigerated dairy case. It's typically sold by the wedge. If you ask the cheese counter staff whether they carry Pecorino Sardo stagionato, the specifically Sardinian variety, most will know what you're asking and can point you to the closest available option. If they look at you blankly, Pecorino Romano aged over 5 months is a reasonable substitute with similar biological properties. Here's how to eat it. Not as a side dish, not as a snack on crackers. The Sardinian pattern is 1 to 2 ounces with a meal, typically lunch or dinner, alongside legumes, vegetables, and olive oil. The fat in the cheese slows digestion of the entire meal. That matters. We'll get to why. 1 ounce is roughly the size of your thumb. 2 ounces is a small wedge, about what you get in a restaurant cheese course portion. This is not a large amount. The Sardinian shepherds weren't eating a cheese plate as an appetizer. They were eating a portion of cheese as one component of a meal that was mostly plants and bread. What you want to avoid is the processed sheep cheese, the vacuum-sealed crumbles labeled feta style that have been pasteurized at high heat and packaged 6 months ago with no aging. The microbiology is gone. The transformation hasn't happened. You're left with protein and saturated fat, and none of the compounds that make this food different. Similarly, the pre-grated Pecorino Romano in the green can, I'll just say it plainly, is not what we're talking about. It's a convenient condiment. It has essentially no relationship to what a Sardinian shepherd is eating. Take a moment right now. Go to your refrigerator, or just think about what's in it. Is there any cheese in there? If yes, is it cow's milk or sheep's milk? Is it aged or fresh? If it's a soft cow's milk cheese, you're eating something with a completely different nutritional profile than what we're talking about today. That's not an indictment. It's just useful to know the difference before you buy the next wedge. Your shopping list is simple: 1 wedge of aged Pecorino Romano, Pecorino Sardo stagionato, or Manchego, under $18. Lasts 2 to 3 weeks at 1 to 2 ounces per day. That's the full protocol at its most basic level. Now let's talk about what aging actually does. When Fiore Sardo spends 6 to 12 months ripening, 3 major biological transformations happen simultaneously. Most people who try to explain Sardinian longevity stop at the first one. Fermentation produces good bacteria, and miss the other 2 entirely. The first transformation is proteolysis. The wild bacteria, particularly L. pericaceae, which persists and actually dominates the final ripening period, produces enzymes that break down casein proteins into peptides and free amino acids. Some of those peptides are biologically active. Specifically, they have ACE inhibitory properties. They function in a way similar to how ACE inhibitor blood pressure medications work by relaxing the tension in arterial walls. This happens inside the cheese before you eat it through bacterial enzymatic action over months. By the time you cut into an aged pecorino, those peptides are already formed. The second transformation is lactose elimination. Most people assume cheese contains lactose. Fresh cheese does, Aged cheese after 5 or more months is effectively lactose-free. The bacteria have converted all of it to lactic acid. This is why many people who can't tolerate milk have no problem with properly aged hard cheeses. The third transformation is lipolysis, fat breakdown. Free fatty acids are released from triglycerides throughout the aging process. In aged pecorino, total free fatty concentrations reach around 4,310 millimoles per kilogram of fresh weight. These released fatty acids contribute to the flavor, yes, but they also behave differently metabolically than intact triglycerides. The matrix has changed, and here's where sheep's milk matters separately from the aging process. Sheep milk is not cow milk. It contains exclusively A2 beta-casein. None of the A1 casein that dominates most commercial cow's milk. A1 casein, during digestion, releases a compound called beta-casomorphin 7. That compound is associated with digestive discomfort and, in some research, with inflammatory signaling. A2 casein doesn't release it. A 2020 New Zealand study found that women drinking A2-only milk had significantly less digestive discomfort and fewer malabsorption symptoms than when they drank conventional cow's milk. Sheep milk also has 2 to 3 times more conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, than cow's milk. Sheep milk actually has the highest CLA content of any ruminant milk, including human breast milk. CLA has documented anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic, and anti-atherogenic properties. And the Sardo breed sheep that produce the milk for Pecorino Sardo graze on wild Mediterranean herbs and grasses, which further concentrates their omega-3 fatty acid content compared to grain-fed animals. None of this applies to industrial dairy. A Holstein cow eating corn silage in a feedlot produces milk with a completely different fatty acid profile than a Sardo sheep eating wild fennel and mountain grasses. The animal matters. The diet of the animal matters. The processing matters. There's one more property of sheep milk I want to spend a moment on because it's the least discussed and possibly the most significant for the specific health outcomes we're talking about. Sheep milk has higher concentrations of butyric acid, technically C4.0, a short-chain saturated fatty acid, than any other ruminant milk. It's also higher in caproic, caprylic, capric, and lauric acids. Short and medium-chain fatty acids are metabolized differently than long-chain fatty acids. They're absorbed more directly, metabolized faster, and make different demands on the digestive system. When you hear saturated fat as a category, this distinction doesn't get made. All saturated fats are treated as equivalent in the public conversation. They are not equivalent biologically, and sheep milk's particular fatty acid profile is part of why the research on its consumption looks different from the research on industrial cow dairy. The calcium picture adds one more layer. Sardinians eating this much cheese are consuming substantial calcium daily. The paradox, and this is genuinely puzzling until you understand the mechanism, is that they have low osteoporosis rates and low arterial calcification simultaneously. Conventional logic says high calcium intake should push excess calcium into arterial walls. In populations deficient in vitamin K2, that's what happens. You get soft bones and hard arteries, the calcium paradox as it's been described in the literature. Vitamin K2 activates 2 specific proteins. Osteocalcin in bone tissue binds calcium and incorporates it into the bone mineral matrix when K2 carboxylates it properly. Matrix GLA protein in arterial walls becomes the body's most potent endogenous inhibitor of vascular calcification when K2 activates it. Without sufficient K2, calcium goes to the wrong place. With it, calcium goes to bones and stays out of arteries. Vitamin K2 is produced by bacteria during fermentation. Its content in cheese increases with ripening and reaches a plateau at around 13 weeks of aging. Hard-aged, full-fat cheeses have the highest K2 content of any common dietary source. The Sardinian pattern of eating aged hard sheep cheese daily for decades provides consistent K2 alongside the calcium it's directing. I've already noted the honest caveat. Pecorino was found lower in menaquinone content than Gouda and Emmental in one study. So this isn't the full explanation, but it's part of the system, one mechanism among several, each contributing something the others can't provide alone. I want to be careful here about one thing. When I first read the data on K2 and aged cheese, vitamin K2, the menaquinone form that's produced by bacteria during fermentation. I was ready to make it a centerpiece of this video, and K2 is real and important. In the Rotterdam study, 4,809 Dutch men and women who ate diets high in vitamin K2 had significantly fewer fatal heart attacks and lower risk of both aortic calcification and all-cause mortality. That effect was specifically from K2, not K1, and age-hard cheeses are one of the main dietary sources of K2 in the Western diet. K2 content increases with ripening and reaches a plateau after about 13 weeks. Here's the nuance I should tell you. One 2018 analysis found that Mediterranean cheeses, including Pecorino, were actually lower in menaquinone than Northern European aged cheeses like Gouda and Emmental. So K2 is part of the picture, but not the whole explanation for Sardinia specifically. It's one piece of a multi-mechanism system, alongside CLA, A2 casein, butyrate, bioactive peptides, and something called the dairy matrix effect. I'll show you how they all connect. Now here's the part that, when I first understood it, genuinely changed how I think about this food. Your gut lining is one cell thick, one layer of cells standing between the contents of your intestine and your bloodstream. When that barrier is intact, bacterial lipopolysaccharides, endotoxins produced by gram-negative bacteria in your gut, stay where they belong. When that barrier becomes permeable, those endotoxins leak through into circulation. Once in the bloodstream, they trigger a chronic, low-grade inflammatory response. That inflammation promotes atherosclerosis. That's the connection between gut health and cardiovascular disease. And it's one of the most active areas of research in the field right now. Sheep cheese is naturally rich in butyric acid. Butyrate, the active form, is the primary energy source for colonocytes, the cells that line your colon. It tightens the intestinal barrier through a specific mechanism. It suppresses Claudin-2, a protein that forms leaky channels between gut cells. It also inhibits a key inflammatory signaling pathway called NF-κB. A 2023 review in Frontiers in Microbiology summarized it plainly. Butyrate producers are the sentinels of the gut. When they're present and fed, the barrier holds. When they're depleted by processed food, by antibiotics, by a low-fiber diet, the barrier begins to fail. The Sardinian pattern of eating aged sheep cheese daily alongside legumes and olive oil and vegetables provides both the butyrate directly and feeds the bacteria that produce more of it. This is not a single mechanism. It's a cascade: intact gut barrier, lower endotoxin load, less systemic inflammation, cleaner arteries. The cheese isn't cardioprotective despite its saturated fat. It may be cardioprotective partly because of what the fermentation did to that fat, what the butyrate does to the gut lining, what the bioactive peptides do to blood pressure, and what the A2 casein doesn't do to the digestive system. The dairy matrix effect, as researchers now call it, refers to the complete physical and chemical structure of a dairy food, the way all of these components are organized together. In 2015, a team led by Degout published a meta-analysis in Nutrition Reviews comparing cheese intake and butter intake in randomized controlled trials using the same amounts of saturated fat. Cheese reduced LDL-C by 6.5%. Butter raised it. Same saturated fat, completely different outcomes. The food matrix, calcium, peptides, fat structure, explains the difference. A 2015 meta-analysis by Chin and colleagues covering 22 prospective cohort studies found that cheese consumption was associated with a relative risk of 0.91 for stroke, meaning regular cheese eaters had a 9% lower stroke risk than non-eaters. A 2023 Umbrella review updated that picture. Each 30 g per day increment of cheese intake was associated with a 3% decrease in cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke risk combined. These are not dramatic numbers. I want to be honest about that. They are associations, not proof of causation. The researchers frame them carefully. But they are consistent across dozens of studies, across different populations, and across different methodologies. And in Sardinia, they sit alongside a population that has been eating this specific cheese from these specific animals, made this specific way for generations, and has the longevity data to show for it. Stomatis Moritis was 66 years old and living in Boynton Beach, Florida, when 9 doctors confirmed his diagnosis: terminal lung cancer. They gave him 6 to 9 months. He decided he wanted to die in Greece. He returned to Icaria, not Sardinia, but the same philosophical archipelago of places where the old ways held, and had his family prepare a grave plot on the hillside. He moved back into his childhood home. He started tending his father's vineyard. He ate from the garden. He slept when he was tired. He sat with old friends past midnight. The cancer didn't kill him in 6 months, or a year, or a decade. Whether it went into remission or was misdiagnosed, no one can say with certainty. What is documented is that he lived for 45 more years. He outlived all 9 doctors who gave him that diagnosis. I think about Stomatis when I look at the data from Barbagia. Not because there's a clean scientific explanation for what happened to him, there isn't, but because what he returned to wasn't a supplement regimen or a specialized diet protocol. It was a place, a way of doing things, animals on hillsides, food made slowly, meals with other people, and in that place a daily routine that happened to include exactly the foods and the practices and the rhythms that the research decades later would start to identify as protective. The village of Arzana in Barbagia is one of the documented longevity clusters. On a weekday morning, the older women move through the market before 8 on. They buy what's in season, what's available that day, what looks right. They've been doing this for 60 years. The shopping itself isn't a health decision, it's just Tuesday. The cheese they bring home isn't a longevity supplement, it's just what's on the table. The consistency of these habits across an entire lifetime, maintained without effort because they're simply how life is organized, is what the data captures. Not a program someone followed for 90 days, a culture someone was born into. The Sardinian shepherds who are living into their late 90s and early 100s didn't read a study. They learned how to make Fiore Sardo from their parents, who learned it from theirs, in a chain of transmission that has remained essentially unbroken for centuries. The PDO specification that legally protects Fiore Sardo today is not a marketing document. It's a record of a practice that works. Raw milk, Sardo breed, lamb rennet paste, wild fermentation, farmhouse production. Change any one of those variables and you get a different cheese, a different biology, a different outcome. There is one thing I should say honestly that this population has which you cannot replicate: altitude. The Barbagia region sits at elevation. The sheep climb. The shepherds climb. The incidental physical activity built into daily life in mountain terrain is not something you can buy at a grocery store. The research on Sardinian longevity acknowledges this. The diet is the part we can work with. The terrain is the part we can't. I'd rather tell you that than pretend the whole thing is transferable. Now, everything I just walked you through, the fermentation, the sheep milk advantage, the gut-heart connection, the dairy matrix effect, that's one chapter of a larger system. It's called the Blue Zone Body Reset. It's a 90-day protocol that covers all 5 blue zones: Okinawa, Sardinia, Icaria, Nicoya, and Loma Linda. Week by week, day by day, shopping lists, meal plans, a printable tracker. It's a PDF. You download it instantly. It works on your phone, your tablet, your computer. If you're watching this on your TV right now, there's a QR code on screen. Scan it with your phone. You'll have the full protocol in your hands in 60 seconds. If you're watching on your phone or computer, the link is in the description below this video. Now back to Sardinia. Here's what the complete system looks like when you put it together. The Sardinian approach to cheese isn't a single habit. It's 4 interconnected choices that amplify each other. The animal, sheep, not cow, because of CLA and A2-casein and butyric acid. The production method, raw or minimally processed milk, long fermentation, no industrial shortcuts. The aging time, minimum 3 months, preferably 6, because the biochemical transformation requires time. And the portion, 1 to 2 ounces per day with a meal, not a large serving consumed rarely. Each of those elements does something specific. Together, they create a biological outcome that none of them achieves alone. That's why it's a system and not a list. The modern trap here is optimization in the wrong direction. Someone reads that aged cheese is healthy, So they buy the most expensive artisan cheese they can find, eat a large amount of it, and add it to a diet that is otherwise high in processed carbohydrates and seed oils and low in fiber. The cheese's butyrate doesn't help a gut that has no fiber-fed bacteria to support it. The bioactive peptides don't lower blood pressure meaningfully when the rest of the diet is driving it up. The system only works as a system. The Sardinian centenarians don't eat aged pecorino instead of vegetables. They eat it with vegetables. The cheese is part of a meal structure built around legumes, whole grain bread, seasonal produce, olive oil, and very small amounts of meat, maybe once a week. The cheese sits inside that matrix, contributing its specific biological properties to a diet that provides everything else those properties need to function. Here's something I find genuinely interesting about the Sardinian data that doesn't fit neatly into either the pro-dairy or anti-dairy argument. Sardinia has higher total cholesterol levels than mainland Italy, 209 versus 205 in males, 211 versus 204 in females, according to a 2009 study tracking cardiovascular risk factors from 1978 to 2001. Their HDL is higher too, their blood pressure is lower, and despite higher cholesterol, cardiovascular mortality in the blue zone region is lower. The standard lipid model predicts worse outcomes for higher cholesterol populations. Barbagia doesn't comply with that prediction. The researchers who have spent the most time studying this population treat the cholesterol paradox as a genuine scientific puzzle. Not a data error, not a fluke, but a real phenomenon requiring a more nuanced explanation than cholesterol number equals cardiovascular risk. Think about what you ate for breakfast this morning and lunch. Not to judge it, just to locate yourself. The average American over 60 consumes less than 15 grams of fiber per day. The recommended minimum is 25. Without adequate fiber, the butyrate-producing bacteria that make aged cheese most valuable don't have enough to eat. You can add the cheese and still miss most of the benefit if the rest of the plate hasn't changed. Here's the second interactive moment I want to give you. Look at this list and honestly count how many of these you eat at least twice a week. Lentils or beans, olive oil as primary cooking fat, seasonal vegetables, whole grain bread or sourdough, fish. If the answer is 2 or fewer, that's where to start. Not with the cheese. The cheese amplifies a foundation. It doesn't create one. Let me tell you what an honest timeline looks like. In the first 72 hours after switching from cow's milk cheese to aged sheep's milk cheese, some people notice their digestion feels different. Less bloating, less of the dull heaviness that can follow a cheese-heavy meal. That's probably the A2 casein. It's not universal, but it's common enough to be worth noting. After your second or third grocery run of consistent daily inclusion, 1 to 2 ounces with lunch or dinner, you'll have established the habit. At that point, it's no longer a decision. It's just what's on the plate. After the first month, you likely won't feel dramatically different. I want to be honest about that. Dietary changes at this scale don't produce dramatic short-term signals. What's changing is chronic, a small reduction in systemic inflammatory load, a gut barrier that's slightly more intact each week, a bioactive peptide effect that accumulates over daily exposure. These are processes measured in years, not days. At 3 months, if you've built the full foundation, the legumes, the fiber, the olive oil, the daily aged sheep cheese, you're inside the actual Sardinian dietary pattern at the level that the research covers. Not a replica of it, but the biological mechanisms are present and active. The day you stop thinking about it, the day you just reach for the pecorino without considering whether you should, that's the day you've built a habit with the staying power of the Barbagia shepherds. Not because you decided to be healthy, but because the food became part of how you eat. Go back to that 2025 study for a moment. 168 nonagenarians, higher LDL, longer survival. 2 centenarians with LDL above 240. The researchers controlled for age, BMI, smoking, self-rated health, and comorbidities. The effect persisted. They argue reverse causality is unlikely, that this isn't simply healthy people who happen to have high cholesterol, but that something about the cholesterol itself, or what it represents about the diet that produced it, is part of the picture. This paradox doesn't apply everywhere. The researchers specifically note it doesn't appear in Okinawa. It may be specific to Barbagia, to this combination of sheep's milk, wild fermentation, mountain terrain, and a diet that has remained largely unchanged for generations. I'm not telling you high LDL is universally healthy. I'm telling you that in the place where people have eaten this specific food this specific way for centuries, the relationship between cholesterol and longevity looks different than what the standard model predicts. The cheese they're eating isn't the same substance as what carries the same name in the dairy case of an American grocery store. The label says Pecorino. The biology is entirely different. That's the thing to take from today. It's not eat more cheese. It's eat this cheese made this way from this animal for this reason. The distinction is everything. Tonight, if you do one thing, find aged sheep's milk cheese, Pecorino Romano Stagionato, Manchego, or Pecorino Sardo Maturo, and eat 1 ounce with dinner, not as a snack, with the meal, alongside whatever vegetables or legumes are already on your plate. That's it. That's the entry point. Next time you're at the store, spend a few minutes at the cheese counter. Ask if they carry aged sheep's milk varieties. Most good supermarkets do. The price is comparable to any decent aged cheese, $12 to $18 for a piece that lasts 2 weeks. You're not looking for the most expensive thing. You're looking for the specific characteristics. Sheep's milk, aged minimum 3 months, hard texture, PDO or DOP designation if possible. If you want the full eating system, not just this piece, I wrote a 60-page guide called the Blue Zone Body Reset. Complete 90-day protocol, shopping lists, recipes, all of it. Built specifically for people over 55 who are done guessing what to eat. Description has the link. Now where were we? Every week, one zone, one practice, one system. Built slowly, the way the Sardinians built theirs. One question for the comments. Had you heard about the Sardinian cholesterol paradox before today? That their non-agenarians with higher LDL were living longer? Tell me below. I read all of them. The Barbagia shepherds never tracked a cholesterol number in their lives. They just ate what their grandparents taught them to make. From the animals that grazed on the mountain above their village, aged in the same stone cellars for the same amount of time. The science caught up to them eventually. It took about 1,000 years. If this exploration of the Sardinian way has changed how you view the simple foods in your pantry, please subscribe and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the hidden history and biological wisdom that modern life has tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for a healthier future together. Our next deep dive into the world's longevity secrets will be opening soon.